Hi there. I thought that since this was my first Trek Actually video to focus specifically on Captain James T. Kirk, that it would be fun to teach my wife Captain Kirk's favorite card game, Fizbin. Of course, it won't really be Fizbin technically, because I don't have the same cards they do on Beta Antares 4, but we can still play it, even though all we have is a standard 52-card deck of playing cards. Would you look at that? You've got half a Fizbin already. I'm in trouble. Anyway, when it came time to choose the subject of this video, I decided it would be fun to explore one of the most misunderstood aspects of Captain Kirk's character. I suppose the best way to begin that exploration is to simply ask the question: is Captain Kirk actually a womanizer? This is one of those things that many people just kinda take for granted. Captain Kirk is a notorious skirt chaser. He's jumping into bed with another alien babe every other episode or something. Kirk as a womanizer has become one of those aspects of Star Trek that are familiar even to people who aren't really fans of the show. It's referenced by comedians.
Captain, my ship can't take much more of this, sir. She's about to blow.
Let's backhandle it.
It shows up in parodies of the show. It's cited to contrast Captain Kirk with Captain Picard, who is far less promiscuous, especially when it comes to members of his own crew, or so it is said. I can't exempt myself from this phenomenon. My first exposure to Star Trek was the movies, which I discovered as a child in the 1980s. And from there, I latched on to Star Trek The Next Generation once it started. I didn't really start to watch and pay attention to the original series until I was a teenager, and by then, the notion that Captain Kirk is the galaxy's most legendary Lothario was something I had accepted as just another part of Star Trek. Pick a number between 1 and 5. Okay. Pick one. Good choice. Anyway, the more I watched the original series, the more I started to notice something. Kirk's actual portrayal on the show didn't really match his reputation. For example, Kirk was supposedly a cowboy, a loose cannon, a shoot first and ask questions later kind of guy. But on the show, he's pretty by the book most of the time. True, there are several episodes where he takes it upon himself to initiate sweeping changes to the societies of the planets they visit, but the writers were making this stuff up as they went along and didn't really build out Starfleet as an institution during the original series, so the responsibilities and limitations of starship captains weren't clearly defined. Kirk's crew on the Enterprise rarely object to the actions he takes, however drastic and unilateral they are. Even Spock seems to regard Kirk not as a maverick who plays by his own rules, but as a model Starfleet captain. Now that I've been a Star Trek fan for over 30 years and seen every episode of the original series at least 2 or 3 times, and seen some of my favorite episodes more times than I can remember, I can say with confidence that the same is true of Kirk's reputation as a womanizer. It just doesn't match up with his portrayal on the show. A queen? Hey. And it is after dark, so that is very good news for you, my dear. Say, would you want to make this game a little more interesting? Like, maybe loser does the dishes, perhaps? It's a bet. Don't misunderstand, I'm not saying Kirk was celibate. Far from it. In fact, if you look at Kirk's entry at Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki, you'll see the authors have helpfully listed all of Kirk's love interests from the original series and the movies. There are quite a few names on that list, 24 to be exact. At first glance, it seems to reinforce the image of Kirk as a philanderer. But on closer inspection, it turns out that almost all of the women listed in Kirk's wiki entry under the romance subheading are people he was in serious, committed relationships with. The first 4 are ex-girlfriends with whom Kirk has been broken up for years by the time we meet him, and one of them, Carol Marcus, we don't even find out about until many years later in the film Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. The fifth person on the list, Helen Noel, is someone Kirk flirted with at a party, but it apparently went no further than that. The 10th person on the list, Lenore Caridian, is someone Kirk kisses and seems to be developing deeper feelings for, but she turns out to be a murderer before anything else can happen between them. Next is Edith Keeler in The City on the Edge of Forever, who is usually regarded as one of the great loves of Kirk's life, a woman he comes to care about so deeply that he very nearly sacrifices the future of the galaxy to save her. Despite the intensity of his feelings for her, their interactions with each other are fairly chaste. I'm pretty sure they never get around to having sex before poor Edith gets pancaked by that truck. The next person on the list who we can definitely say Kirk slept with is number 18, Miramani from the Paradise Syndrome, whom Kirk marries while suffering from amnesia. Miramani becomes pregnant with Kirk's child and dies soon after. The rest of the list consists of people Kirk either tried and failed to seduce while he was in some kind of altered state, or who tried to seduce Kirk while they were not what they appeared to be, or who Kirk flirted with for some strategic purpose but probably didn't actually sleep with. Oh, and Antonia, a woman Kirk lived with at some point, probably between the events of Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek II. We catch a glimpse of her when Picard finds Kirk in the Nexus in Star Trek Generations. You see how I have a red jack, a black 6, and a red 5? That's called Prelude to a Fizbin. And since we're playing during a month with 30 days, all I need is a spade below a 10 or a jack above a 7, and I win. Well, don't look at me like that. I don't make the rules. Other than the ex-girlfriends, Miramani and Antonia, the only person on the list we can confidently assume Kirk actually slept with is Deela here. She is number 19 on the Memory Alpha list, and she appears in an episode from Star Trek's third season titled Wink of an Eye. The Enterprise responds to a distress call from the planet Scalos, but when Kirk leads a landing party down to the surface, they find it totally uninhabited. No animals, no plants, no people, though Spock does find some evidence that people were there recently. The landing party's red shirt disappears right in front of McCoy, so they decide maybe it's a good idea to return to the ship. But once everyone is back on board the Enterprise, they start experiencing random malfunctions. And then there's this weird air conditioner-looking thing that's been tied into the environmental controls. And there's this high-pitched buzzing noise that keeps recurring. Kirk learns what's going on after he has a sip of coffee on the bridge, and everyone else starts moving really slow. That's when Deela shows up. She's like, "Hi, I'm the Queen of Scalos. The reason everyone else seems to be moving slow right now is because I spiked your coffee so that you'd become hyper-accelerated like us Scalosians." Deela tells Kirk there is a scientific explanation for how and why the Scalosians all exist in a much faster time frame relative to everyone else, but she doesn't waste time sharing that explanation in detail because it's not really important to the story, and this is Star Trek, not Star Trek The Next Generation. Kirk heads back down to the environmental control room. When he gets there, he runs into Compton, the red shirt who disappeared from the landing party. It turns out Compton was hyper-accelerated too, and now he's 100% Team Scalos. Kirk's like, "Oh yeah, that's nice. Kick, chop." There are some more Scalosians there, and they grab Kirk. Then Compton does a last-second babyface turn and tries to help Kirk, but one of the Scalosians fights Compton off, scratching him in the process. That's too bad for Compton because it turns out that if you get scratched while you're hyper-accelerated, you start to age at a much faster rate. That's why in a few moments, Compton is lying dead on the floor looking like Willem Dafoe in old age makeup. The Scalosian in charge down here is this guy, Rael, and he's... Wait a minute. He looks familiar to me. Where have I seen him before? Oh, shit! Captain Kirk, watch yourself. This dude resurrected his dead girlfriend's head in a cake pan. Don't turn your back on him, Jim. He's hardcore. And kind of a sicko. Anyway, it turns out there are only 5 Scalosians left on the whole planet, and the same natural disaster that caused them all to become hyper-accelerated also rendered the men sterile. As a result, the 2 remaining Scalosian women must mate with outsiders in order for their species to survive. The Scalosians plan to convert the Enterprise into a big freezer to preserve the rest of the crew in suspended animation and thaw them out as they need them. But for starters, Deela has chosen Kirk to be her baby daddy. And that brings us to the scene that is the whole reason I'm even telling you about this episode. It's not even a scene, really. It's just a single shot. But a shot that is pregnant with meaning. Just like Deela's hoping that Kirk's shot will get her pregnant. Is that too crass? Deela and Kirk go to Kirk's cabin. They seem to be getting along pretty well with each other. We cut to another scene, then cut back to find Kirk on the edge of his bed, pulling his boots on. And that is the closest we get to Captain Kirk having sex with someone in all of the TV and film adventures of the original Star Trek characters. The naughty suggestion of recently completed coitus represented by Captain Kirk putting his shoes back on. Granted, one big reason for that is that Star Trek was originally produced and aired in the 1960s, when censors were very careful not to allow offensive material to be broadcast. They kept the airwaves clean back then, reserved them for wholesome, family-friendly programming, like George Wallace defending segregation on Meet the Press, not restrained depictions of adults engaging in consensual, mutually enjoyable sexual relationships. Filth like that might be a bad influence on the kids. Whatever factors outside of the production of the show may have contributed, the fact remains that Captain Kirk, as he is actually presented on Star Trek, is far from the relentless horn dog he is reputed to be. He seems to have quite a few ex-girlfriends, almost as many as MacGyver, but all the exes we're introduced to are women with whom he's had serious, committed relationships. Is it accurate to call someone promiscuous because they've had a half dozen or so serious romantic partners? If we must sort Kirk into a category according to his sexual history, I think it's much more accurate to call him a serial monogamist. He's had quite a few partners, but there's no evidence that he frequently engages in casual sex. He's not BoJack Horseman. He's more like Mr. Peanut Butter. Aside from the limitations imposed by network censors and Kirk's own apparent preference for relationships rather than no-strings-attached hookups, the best evidence we have that Kirk doesn't sleep around is that we know he has a much more important priority in his life, something a more active and adventurous sex life would only distract him from. I'm talking about his professed first, last, and only love, his starship. In the Corbomite maneuver, Kirk and McCoy are briefly interrupted by the arrival of Yeoman Janice Rand, who delivers the captain some food. Kirk reacts to her presence with annoyance, and when McCoy asks him about it, he explains, "I've already got a female to worry about. Her name is the Enterprise." In The Naked Time, we get another glimpse at the depth of Kirk's commitment to his ship, and it seems like it might not be the healthiest relationship he's ever had. Under the influence of a mysterious infection that erodes inhibition, Kirk says to Spock, "This vessel, I give, she takes. She won't permit me my life. I've got to live hers." As he exits that scene, he pauses to whisper to the Enterprise, "Never lose you. Never." So maybe it's not so much that Kirk isn't interested in getting down with the ladies more often than he does, he just doesn't feel free to do that because, as a captain, his first duty is to the ship. He does indicate a strong attraction to Yeoman Rand on more than one occasion. When a transporter accident splits him into two people in the episode The Enemy Within, his evil half goes straight for her, and we catch him leering like a creep at Rand and one or two other women throughout the series. But the fact remains, Kirk controls whatever lustful impulses he may feel. He appears to prefer to have sex with women he's in relationships with, or at least seriously interested in, and when we see him kissing or flirting with women he's just met, it's almost always because one of them is in some kind of altered state or attempting some kind of strategic seduction. Even Kirk's implied role in the hay with Deela turns out to be part of a ploy to thwart the Scalosians and save the Enterprise. Before we wrap this up, I feel it's only fair to note that so far I've been talking only about the original classic Trek version of Captain Kirk. In 2009, another Captain Kirk was introduced into the Star Trek canon, and his sex life appears to be quite different from that of his counterpart. The James T. Kirk of the Kelvin timeline, who we see depicted in the films Star Trek, Star Trek Into Darkness and Star Trek Beyond is much closer to the swingin' bachelor type the original Kirk is often described as being. Unlike the Kirk of the Prime timeline, who has apparently been single-mindedly focused on his career in Starfleet since he was a teenager, Kelvin timeline Kirk grows into a rebellious, unfocused young man. He's just as smart and cunning as his Prime timeline counterpart, but far less serious and goal-oriented. He only attends Starfleet Academy after Captain Pike dares him to do it, and while he's there, he seems a lot more interested in, extracurricular activities than Prime Kirk, who his old friend Gary Mitchell describes as a stack of books with legs. Kelvin Kirk's tendency to engage in casual sex continues after he becomes captain of the Enterprise, at least for a time. In Star Trek Into Darkness, he spends the night with two sexy cat ladies. It's also mentioned that at some point he had a relationship with Christine Chapel, who has since transferred to an assignment on the Outer Frontier. Kirk doesn't seem to remember her. By the time we see him again in Star Trek Beyond, he doesn't seem to be getting nearly so busy, but that might be because the Enterprise has been on deep space assignment for 3 years, and this Kirk now takes his responsibilities as captain as seriously as Prime Kirk, and considers people under his command to be off limits for sexual relations. Kelvin vs. Spock, on the other hand, well, that's what happens when you think with your human half. Really, the answer to the question, is Captain Kirk actually a womanizer, depends on which Captain Kirk you're referring to. If you're talking about Kirk Prime, the answer is no, he isn't. If you're talking about Kelvin Kirk, the answer is yes, he is. For a while, anyway. And by the way, that's perfectly fine. Kirk's promiscuity, or assumed promiscuity, is usually brought up as a way to put him down or make fun of him, but there's nothing wrong with being promiscuous in and of itself. So long as he acts with the full knowledge and consent of his partners, and within the bounds of ethics expected of a person in his position, I say let Kirk, or anyone else, have sex with as many people as they want, as often as they want. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you how Wink of an Eye ends. So Kirk double-crosses Deela in the transporter room and grabs her stun weapon thingy, then meets up with Spock, who has figured out how to reverse the hyper-acceleration process and intentionally accelerated himself in order to help Kirk. They destroy the Skolosian air conditioner, and Kirk beams the Skolosians back down to their planet and takes the antidote to return to normal speed, while Spock remains hyper-accelerated for a few more minutes so he can repair the ship. And then they just leave! They abandon the Skolosians to either die out or try their deep freeze scam on some other unsuspecting ship that passes by. We don't know what happens because they're never heard from again. This isn't the only time Kirk drops a group of defeated villains on a planet and flies away instead of helping them or turning them over to the authorities for their crimes. I can think of at least one other time Kirk does this, and it comes back to bite him in the ass in a big way. But that's a subject for another video. As far as this video goes, I have to conclude that Captain Kirk, Prime timeline Captain Kirk anyway, is not the womanizer he's reputed to be. Quite the contrary, in fact. He's motivated by duty to his ship and his crew, not his libido. And when he does involve himself with other people romantically, he's interested not in one-night stands, but in forming serious, committed relationships based on mutual understanding and respect. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think our game is just about over. That's a Royal Fizbin. You beat me. How the hell is that? Right. The dishes. Suppose now I have to suffer the punishment that I myself prescribed, while you stand aside, drinking in the irony like some ancient Greek god looking down from Olympus. I mean, did this backfire in my face or what? You mean we both do the dishes? Above all else, a god needs compassion. You know, you're quite a dish yourself. Hey folks, hope you liked this episode. Some of you might have a suspicion as to what the topic of the next Trek Actually video will be, and in a minute or so I will confirm perhaps your suspicions when I tell you what the next topic is going to be. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. I want to shout out my brand new $5 plus per month Patreon patrons. If you pledge to support my Patreon campaign at a level of $5 a month or more, you get yourself a shout out at the end of Trek Actually, just like these fine folks, my newest $5 or more patrons. John Jenkins, thank you, John. Jesse Earl, thank you, Jesse. Muldred D. Malcontent, thank you, Muldred. Simon Archambault, thank you, Simon. A Skeptosaurus, thank you, A Skeptosaurus. The Bourgeois Bohemian, thank you, Bourgeois Bohemian. Mindy Newell, thank you, Mindy. Aisha's Odd Obsession, thank you, Aisha. Lawrence Gonzalez, thank you, Lawrence. And Aaron Thompson. Thanks to all of my Patreon patrons, no matter what level you pledge at, but specifically, especially thanks to you folks I just read out, the newest $5 plus patrons. I also want to remind you, if you dig the Star Trek stuff that I do, don't forget to check out the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that myself and the hilarious Jason Harding co-host. It's called The Ensign's Log, where we play characters who are assigned to a certain famous Federation starship that is in the middle of a certain famous 5-year mission, and you get to see what happens from our perspective as low-ranking officers aboard the ship during the events of some legendary classic Star Trek episodes. If you really dig funny stuff pertaining to Star Trek, then I hope you will give the Ensign's Log a chance. You can listen to it through the links that are in the description box of this video. You can subscribe via RSS using your favorite podcast app, or you can listen on the website or on SoundCloud. The links are in the description, and I really, really hope that you decide to check out the Ensign's Log, because it's one of my favorite things that I do. Now, there's something new I want to tell you about, and that is that starting with the upload of this video, actually going up a few hours after this video that you're watching right now goes live, so by the time you're watching it, it's probably up already, on my Patreon page, I will be conducting a poll to determine upcoming topics for Trek Actually videos. I think this is a fun way to reward my Patreon patrons and engage them in the channel a little bit more. So if you are a Patreon patron of mine at any level, from $1 a month all the way up to whoever's pledging the most right now, you can go and vote for the January topic. The next Trek Actually topic I have already chosen, and I will let you know about that in a second, but you can choose the topic for January's Trek Actually episode. You can choose from 5 different options that I have selected, and I will tell you what topic won at the end of the next Trek Actually video. So if you haven't become a patron yet and you want to help choose what the next Trek Actually topic is, you can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives, and for any amount, if you become a patron at any level, you can vote to help choose the next Trek Actually topic. For the December video that's coming up in just a few weeks, I have already chosen that topic, and as I said last month in the previous Trek Actually video, I'm going to do 2 episodes about Captain Kirk, and the next one is going to be about a different aspect of Captain Kirk's personality. I alluded to it a little bit in this video. It's going to be how the Wrath of Khan is actually Kirk's fault. That will be the next Trek Actually video. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.